Hi, I'm Paul Whitkay, founder of the Alliance of CEOs. I'm excited to welcome our Alliance members and guests to our latest Visionary Leaders Roundtable. We're discussing a very important topic today, the future of privacy and trust. I remember back in 1999 when one of our members helped launch Salesforce.com as a world-class sales automation software company. And shortly after that, he told me they were changing their name to become the first CRM or customer relationship management company. And I was told it was all about the data. Over the past 25 years, the amount of data our companies have on our customers collectively has grown astronomically. Most of our visionary leaders roundtables in the past have discussed how almost every industry and ecosystem has changed every aspect of our lives and our businesses and are being transformed at exponential rates. From our data to where we live, where we work, how we travel, what we buy, what we watch, we have information on everything. And this offers incredible power to us, our businesses, to customize and personalize solutions for most every aspect of our lives. But with power comes responsibility. Today, we brought together 6 amazing leaders who have spent a long time being passionate about how to ensure privacy and build trust. And trust can be built, it takes time to build, and it can take one incident to break. So let's meet their panelists and let's get rolling. So Michelle, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Dennedy. I am currently the Chief Data Strategy Officer for Abex Technologies and founder of privacycode.ai. I've spent a lot of years in the chair of Chief Privacy Officer in infrastructure companies like Sun, Intel, and Cisco.
Thank you. Doug.
Mute, sorry. Doug Leeds. I am telling you for the first time, anyone, that I'm the CEO of a new nonprofit startup called RSL Collective, which is really simple licensing. I have run technology companies and formerly was an attorney and sat on the board of trustee and did a lot of privacy and trust and security work.
Thank you. Agnes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here, Paul. Agnes Bundy-Scanlon. I have been working in the privacy area for many, many years. I was one of the first bank privacy officers back in 1999, and also was the founder and co-creator of the IAPP many, many years ago. Currently, I am the president of the Cambridge Group. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian. Ian Cohen.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I was on mute. Nice to be here. Paul, thanks for inviting me. I am the CEO of a data privacy technology company called Locker. And prior to that, I spent 20 years working in consumer data, including at the credit bureaus and a couple startups, one called credit.com. And so I've seen data proliferation from both sides, from the regulatory side and from the operator side. So great to be here.
Thank you. Andy Lunsford.
Hi, Andy Lunsford, co-founder and CEO of BreachRx. Our company offers a product that helps companies prepare for, respond to, and recover from data breaches, privacy incidents, data incidents. I come from a deep litigation background in data breaches, privacy law, cybersecurity law. Also spent a stint in-house at Walmart's general counsel's office. Excited to be here.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dominique Shelton-Leipzig of Global Data Innovation. Introduce yourself and then just take us into the kind of a preview of what we're going to be talking about.
Thanks, Paul, and excited to be here. As you said, I'm the CEO of Global Data Innovation. Our firm focuses on equipping CEOs and other leaders with the tools necessary to transform digital uncertainty into clarity and action and actual leverage. So I'm excited to go over and sort of tee up the topic that we're going to be covering today. Should I share my slides? Okay. So I'm just going to share slides here for a sec. Okay, so why is this whole topic of privacy so important? Well, in 2022, we had a market cap of on NASDAQ of 1.4 trillion of losses just due to privacy. Cyber, I call it like a second cousin of privacy. Privacy is about what you do with data and you share, and cyber is about how you protect the data. And since 2015, this statistic always strikes me, we have lost nearly 60 trillion in market cap, 60 trillion in losses around the globe. So the good news is, and this is where will be the meat of the matter today, where we're going to share ideas, but the good news is that we have solutions in place in frameworks to make sure that we're part of digital transformation excellence and not headlines and time-consuming losses. So the first step in this is to have a privacy leader. That privacy leader, it will be needing to be well-versed in AI and cyber, but you need to know who in your organization has responsibility. They don't have to have full-time responsibility for privacy, but someone has to own this. The second step is an actionable data inventory. And this is really important because you won't be able to gauge what your customers or your employees or business partners expect you to collect and share if you don't know what you're collecting and sharing and where it is. So a data inventory that details what you're collecting, why, who you're sharing with, and where that critical data is stored is very important, both for meeting customer expectations and also for protecting. The third area is a gap analysis or risk assessment, if you will. Really important to know what jurisdictions, we have 160 countries with data protection laws around the world, believe it or not. And most of our states in the US have unique privacy laws. So just doing a gut check to know what your legal obligations are and how those fit in with your actual data practices that will be revealed in your data inventory. For high risk processing, that's just really anything that you would expect that's sensitive: health, financial, children, employment, insurance, these types of education, these sorts of areas that are sensitive, or race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, political beliefs, anything like that. In step 4, you want to have special attention, and what they call that is an impact assessment, where you are documenting what sensitive data that you are collecting and what special steps you're taking to protect. Phase 5 is the mitigation plan for all the risks that you've identified in steps 3 and steps 4. And that includes vendor management, training of your rank and file, as well as your senior leadership team and board on privacy issues. It also concerns external privacy notices and policies. What are you telling the world about how you're handling data? And then internal policies. What do your employees understand are their obligations? And then finally, step 6 is just making sure that there is an auditable record. And with that, I thought I would turn it over to Michelle to kick off the conversation.
Michelle, you're on mute.
Thank you. I guess I want to kick us off, and we'll kind of be brief in our summation so that we can get the conversation going, being a bit heretical. Governance is not your goal. We'll start with that. So when we're starting in that stack of steps to get to compliance, we get to start actually in your comfort zone as CEOs. So what is the business objective, and what kind of data propels you to get there? And that's where we begin. And so this starts to unravel the step-by-step of the where for regulations, the why for processing, the in-depth for sensitivity, and it starts to kick you off on a journey of my favorite formula, which is DV greater than DR equals success. DV being data value, and values greater than your data risk equals your success. And so many of times we're sort of taking out risk and looking at mitigating risk, and we're not even considering how to keep it in focus with that data value of what is it not just monetarily worth, but is this actually going to propel your business? Is this going to inspire your employees? Is this going to attract and retain the types of customers so that you can actually propel your business forward with authorized data according to ethical, legal, and sustainable principles?
So Michelle, you're starting off on the first step of AI, cyber, and privacy technology. So basically, just moderate the conversation among the panelists for a conversation right in that area of starting with the leadership.
Okay, so we'll go in a little bit deeper now. I thought we were going to do a quick run through a thunder run. So I hear a lot today with a lot of our clients we have to get into AI because it's going to be more efficient. And so I think the first consideration as you look across this platform of possibilities is to really ask for outcomes. What kind of mass analysis do you need? What depth of recognition do you need? So for example, if you're a healthcare company and you're using an AI analysis for radiation review, for example, you obviously don't want anything that's going to fuzz the data or distract the data. You need very precision data. So what you're going to have is a columnar protection of starting with the patient and the provider and the analysts and any transport layers that have to get information A to destination B. You're going to figure out how to have that column protected on the outcomes from beginning to end. So you're not looking at something like obfuscation or differential privacy or federation. You're looking for something specific, and you're going to lean more on the security side and the delivery side than you're going to do. So that's being very specific about one, but I want you to be specific. So before we just get stars in our eyes thinking, oh, we're just going to automate all the boring stuff, let's first do an analysis of what is high risk and high value, what is low risk and low value. And actually, you're going to get your bang for your buck when you're applying technology on this is business processing, not necessarily the privacy enhancing stuff. If it's low risk and low priority data, that's the boring stuff your guys don't want to do anyway. Start there on your journey so that you can use things like anonymization. You can do things like federation and have different sources of data coming from different places. And you're not going to lose that much fidelity as you're having your business outcome. As you march further up the steps, people are sort of getting excited about, oh no, no one's going to write our screenplays anymore. Oh no, who's going to write our contracts and be our lawyers? That's very high value, very high risk. And I'm going to ask you to peel back the temptation to dive in there first because it's fun and sexy, and first figure out what are those business processes that are very well known. That's where you're going to start to have a privacy successful outcome, because you're going to consider what is minimization. You probably can minimize a lot. What is proportional? These are all the steps of the old-fashioned wholesome privacy protection, and you find it blending into all of these new rules and regulations when you get to your AI processing and you're having to layer on things like explainability, discoverability, bias, accuracy creep. So those things sound new, but if you've actually started from basis zero of what is the business processing, what is the data necessary, what's high risk versus low value, then you can start to have that explainability model building along as you're selecting various technologies to do the protection layer that you want to have as a business outcome. And you can evaluate how much change control or churn of your own customers or churn of your employee base is going to be impacted when you're reaching for these very data enriched technologies as we get further and further along the machine learning and AI sort of incantations, if you will. And you'll be able to look at what is a third party that needs to be in-house versus a simple machine learning algorithm that maybe you can have, either sitting on a cloud or have very little maintenance to avoid creep of accuracy.
So let's open up to the panel. So as we move into the era of AI and algorithmic governance, how can C-suite and board leaders move beyond the checkbox compliance and instead elevate privacy as an asset? Doug, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, well, look, I think I love what Michelle said, but I also think that there is a reality that this is happening. The use and the experimentation and the sort of ideation around how AI can work for your company, but also for each group, each person within your company is happening across the board. And that sort of experimentation, it's happening at the high value stuff and the low value stuff. And I think one of the questions is that structure that you outline is very interesting, but how do you tie that into the diffuse nature of this is happening everywhere in my organization? Everyone's touching this, everyone's thinking about it, but they're thinking about the opportunities, not necessarily the risks. So how do I deal with that?
I actually was thinking about that too, Michelle and Doug, and from the standpoint of, Michelle, you made the comment about governance, and you all know I'm a risk and governance sort of freak. And I do think that there's no need to reinvent any mold. Some people say, oh, you just throw out the old playbook. This is a whole new environment. I still think that that playbook and that overall thought process and structure is needed, particularly to your point, Doug, for consistency. There needs to be a framework that people are working under within an organization in order to ensure that people are contemplating consistency, having policies and procedures that are consistency, working through some sort of a guideline. So you'll hear me constantly talk about the importance of risk and governance, and I know there are other discussions that will occur on that, but I think governance or some sort of a framework to provide consistency internal so that also in regulated areas like financial institutions, insurance companies, when you have to take your program or your product externally and talk about it, the first question that's going to be raised is, well, what's your guidance? What is your framework? What are your policies and procedures?
I want to throw out a little bit of I don't know, a teaser to our CEOs here. Is it along those lines? You know, how often have you considered data quality, security, privacy working in concert as data asset drivers versus something for either IT or legal to sort of go into their black boxes and worry about? Because I totally agree with what's been said. This is not a de novo review. This is getting back to basics of quality management and ethics.
So Ian, unmute and what's your perspective on that? And then lead us into the second step of data inventory.
Yeah, I mean, there's a decent segue here in that, you know, AI is a huge leap forward and a huge risk forward. No judgment intended. But the core problem that I see goes back to Michelle's point around data collection. And so I have like really bad news and really good news. I'd say the really bad news is if we just sort of frame this a little bit, that we've all started using very cool services to increase our revenue, increase our conversions, Google Analytics, Salesforce, cloud software that's meaningful. And along with that is lots of piggybackers that are there to collect data. So the bad news is that 90+% of the time when I talk to a company, they intend to do well and they're unaware of what's on their site. And the really good news is you probably don't need 80% of that 90%. Okay. And so what I specifically mean, and I'll share a visual to sort of kick us off here. So, I mean, we're all technical enough and we understand that we build sites with third parties, and that third party ecosystem is easily exploitable. Now, most of the exploits, so if you're talking about cybersecurity, this is a very easily exploitable place to do domain hijacking, to do skimmer attacks, to just on the less malicious side, just steal data as an ad tech platform, as a data broker. So the problem that companies now have is they just don't know what's on their site. And more importantly, they don't have control over it because we've spent years building up a framework for cybersecurity, which is very similar to, I think, what will emerge as our framework for privacy. But that whole framework for cybersecurity is existing in an older part of our tech ecosystem. It's existing internally inside our own stack. Meanwhile, you've got, as I just mentioned, all these third parties, right? All these third parties are how we're doing stuff, including AI. We're doing third-party API calls, SDKs, just client-side activity. So basically, I'll just give a quick primer. When you go to a site like Marriott.com and you book a room, a huge portion of what you're interacting with isn't Marriott. It's a third party that's sitting at an edge point somewhere, serving directly to your browser. And that's just unfortunately or fortunately how the internet runs fast. So you end up putting all this trust in a part of the stack that your cybersecurity doesn't control at all, at all. So let me show you a visual to put this in perspective. So I don't want to point fingers at any company. So I'm going to use a publishing company in the UK as our example. So nobody expects a publishing company to really be the best at privacy. So let me go here, share this screen. Okay. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to look at the Daily Mail here. So the Daily Mail, I'm looking at all these stats, but let's just cut to the chase here. What do I mean by there's a bunch of stuff you don't need on your site? So these are the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth parties serving on a single page of a website on a single day. So now think about the job of your C-suite, especially your CISO and your privacy team and your general counsel. They are legally responsible for all of this crap. So what you're looking at here is in green, I have the first party. That's my own domain. In blue, I've got all my third-party software that I use, including API calls, including SDKs, including all this other stuff that's serving, from an edge point. And then you have fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth party. So I want to be quick about this and get to how we deal with this at a higher level. But let me just sort of increase the visibility here by doing a search in here for Google. So lots and lots of companies are getting hit with regulatory enforcement actions, or more likely than not, demand letters. And I've just typed in Google to see all the different places that have Google. So you might have your security team say, we've got it locked down, and we know exactly what's there. And if somebody opts out, they're not going to share their data, and it's never going to share PII. But what is going on here? What about these guys down here? CRBcargo.com has their own instance of Google Analytics. Do you know who they are? Do you know what they're gathering? Do you trust them? And what about over here? Sync, InMobi, or RTB GumGum real-time bidding platform. So you're now responsible for all of this. And here's the really cool thing about this. I could probably get rid of about this much without really affecting your revenue that much. So I'm not suggesting people shut down their revenue. I'm suggesting this is a huge problem, and it's used in spycraft. So the mundane is, if you think about cybersecurity as having a bad guy, you've got this huge other problem that's emerging in privacy and that kind of security, in the sense that you don't need to have a bad guy. You can just have a bunch of sloppy actors. And the more data we gather, so what's happening is the effectiveness of targeted advertising keeps getting lower, and in response, we're gathering more and more data. And so what do we do in response to that? We put up a banner that says, do you accept these 500 third parties in the background? Do you want to let these people track your data? And it reminds me of Norton antivirus in the 80s. Like, it would pop up a screen saying, do you, or, maybe early 90s, alphanumeric character XYZ38 exclamation point is trying to access your system. Would you like to give them access? And I'd be like, I don't know. I thought that was your job as a virus protection software to tell me what to do. And that's kind of what I get here. And I just want to point out that this company, who I'm redacting here, is doing exactly what they're supposed to do according to the law. That being said, they're still getting in trouble because of this ridiculousness. So what you have here is paperwork trying to cover a real technology problem. And so I'm going to go back to data and finding everything, because you then have to look at what's in your system, how you categorize it. But before I get into the minutia of that, let's just start with the simplest part of this. Like, if you don't collect a bunch of stuff that you don't need, you don't have to protect it. And it's expensive to protect this stuff. It's expensive to do these, when somebody says, forget me, I want to never have known you. That's not an easy thing to do. We are spending so much money on this. But let me go to Doug Leeds has a question.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, and this is really fascinating, but just thinking about me as a CEO of an organization where all this is going on, and it's fantastic that it's going on. But I'm wondering, how can I play a part in that? And the question I have is, how do I know when it's wrong, when it's going wrong? Is there indications or things that, other than a dashboard that looks really great, that I expect my CISO or my head of privacy to be looking at as a CEO? How do I monitor that this is going on?
So in security, ask that question in security. What's the answer? You assume it's wrong in security. You don't assume it's right and start from there. You assume it's wrong.
But as a CEO, if I assume it's wrong, I'm removing trust from my people. Like,
no, I don't think that. I guess, you need transparency. So for me, I guess there's two problems. First of all, most people don't have, and Michelle can speak to this, really don't have ownership around this. So like I work with companies all the time. Andy's going to talk about this later after breaches. I get involved with companies before and after they have huge problems. And every single time, without fail, the problem is nobody owns it. Nobody owns it. So what's happening is marketing's put a lot of this stuff on the site. IT's put some of it on the site. You've got the CISO, like we're protecting you against other stuff over here. I don't care about your little privacy stuff. But I'm not being flippant. It is, does somebody own it? Like prove to you, does somebody own? Just ask the most simple question is my simple answer. Okay, is the consent banner working? Are we collecting data? Have we done an audit? Simple as have we done an audit of all of our trackers? Because like each one of those is an easy potential lawsuit. Not each one of them, most of them, many of them are easy potential. So just ask the simplest questions and demand the simplest answers. And by the way, oftentimes I find that people are extremely happy to be called out like, oh, you care. That's great that you care. And there's going to be people who are annoyed, but just a couple simple questions.
So
is what you think happening? And does this all make business sense? Am I making money on this? Go ahead.
All right, well, let's keep rolling. Let's go to the third step here, because it's a huge topic. We'll never be able to dig into.
I'm sorry, I burned up.
That's okay. Yeah. Let's Agnes, lead us into the topic of legal gap analysis, and let's get some input on what legal risks concern our CEOs most.
Sure, and I'll pick up a little bit from where you've left off, Ian. I think about this whole legal gap analysis as really an operational discovery process. In addition to my consulting firm, I sit on the boards of 3 corporate companies. And with everything that's been going on in these past 6 months, the process in which many of the companies today are looking at, for instance, the executive orders is similarly to how you might be looking at the various legal, regulatory, and laws as it relates to privacy, cyber, and AI. For instance, triaging. Many companies have a group within the organization. Maybe it's in legal, maybe it's in compliance, maybe it's in risk, maybe they work with outside forces, but as new laws and regulations come in, as the executive orders come in, there's an analysis done internally. And then there's the effort to speak within the enterprise and ask certain questions. So going to the different functions, HR and technology, marketing, asking the question, tell me what you were doing today and what do you collect? How are you managing the business? What are the existing procedures, and contemplating then where are the gaps? It's sort of moving beyond just reacting to the corporate laws and the current laws, but how is management, how are you communicating to the board about complying with existing laws? Also looking at anticipating future laws. Risk mitigation, we'll be talking about this later. Vendor management, we'll be talking about this later, and more on internal preparedness. But you want to ensure that your policies are up to date and there are relevant teams that are working on the training. Who is in the room? I talked about this before, and Ian and Doug both mentioned this. Who is participating in these discussions? You don't want it to be siloed in terms of looking at the gap analysis, in terms of looking at the impact within the organization, but you want to make sure that all of the individuals are in the room. Specifically, when it looks to the blind spots or sort of the legal gaps that organizations might be underestimating, bias and discrimination is something at the forefront, particularly for financial institutions. I sit on the board of Truist, and I'm a long-term banker. AI algorithms can perpetuate and even amplify existing societal biases. And these biases can lead to discriminatory outcomes in areas like hiring, credit scoring, and other areas. Also, the lack of transparency. The nature of some of the AI systems can make it difficult to understand how decisions are made, which can hinder efforts to identify and, again, address some of those biases. Another thing is really the evolving nature. You know, we know that AI, we know that privacy, we know that cyber, there are a lot of regulations out there, and the increased use requires organizations to sort of align with evolving data privacy regulations and really implement a robust data governance policies. We've talked about policies before. We'll keep talking about them. Policies and procedures are really a key method for dealing with some of these gaps. Intellectual property and copyright is another area. Many questions surround AI generated content and the right of original creators to remain complex and look at really careful consideration of some of these different requirements. Another area is the emerging liability. I don't think that the legal framework of AI today is mature enough. It's certainly developing. So therefore, the companies may face new forms of liability for unintended consequences caused by the harm of these AI systems. I think with all of these matters, there still needs to be some sort of human oversight and accountability. We talked about accountability earlier. I always believe that there should be one person within the organization responsible for different areas, even though it is the responsibility of the entire organization to manage these efforts. But companies do need to ensure that there's human oversight and accountability in AI deployment to mitigate the risk and also maintain trust. Trust is very, very important here. Trust within the organization, trust from the organization to its board. The board needs to be able to trust that the information that is being shared by the organization on all of these matters is good. Transparency is very key here. And these are areas that need to be communicated on an ongoing basis. When a company is contemplating its compliance with cyber and privacy and AI, there does need to be that regular reporting to either the risk committee of the board, the audit committee of the board, the technology committee of the board, and to the full board. Again, transparency is really important here. Another way to help with the gap analysis is to ensure that there's one record of systems, sort of one record where all of the uses of AI, all of the various methods and policies and procedures are contained, as well as what are the trends, what are the issues that are facing the organization and how are we mitigating them. Something to always think about, regulatory issues lag behind threat landscape of technology. Technology moves much, much, much faster. So therefore, if you're an organization that doesn't have a purpose, doesn't have principles, doesn't have these policies and procedures in place, it's really hard to be able to anticipate challenges and forces ahead, and also get the internal collaboration that you need in order to get these efforts done. So I'll sort of just lastly say that what is business justification and fitness is how you want to contemplate your program, always asking, what are you able to do? What can't you do? Because you don't want violations of law. What are you able to do? Agility and flexibility are key here.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's move on to step 4, data impact assessment and how to deal with sensitive data. So, Doug, you want to lead us on that one?
It's great to thank you, and great to follow Agnes and the talk about trust. And as we're talking about the data impact and the assessment of the data impact, I thought I'd tell you a story. Paul reminded me of this story before we got on the call, but I think it's really interesting. So I'm running a company called eClub. We are delivering food to people's offices, obviously pre-COVID, when people went to offices more. And we're trying to use AI or machine learning to understand what recommendations of food to give people. That's it. Just what recommendations of food to give people. And so we're learning it. We're based on their orders, and people who order the same food, we're coming up with profiles. And all of a sudden, and we didn't even realize this, all of a sudden we start seeing things in the data that can tell us things like, is the customer pregnant? Might the customer have an eating disorder? Are the customer suffering from mental health issues? All these things are starting to show up in the data, not that we actually went and asked for this data or collected this data. And that's what's, I think, really interesting about the AI world we're living in, is all of a sudden they're creating data for us that we never asked for, we never looked for, we never wanted, but all of a sudden we have. This came about because one of our people, a manager in customer success, started noticing this. Now, this manager said to her manager, and then to us at the exec level, well, look at this. This is interesting. What do we do about it? What I took away from that is that we built a culture where people could speak up and say something, and bring that forward. And I think we're talking about, Agnes talking about trust. One of the key elements for us as CEOs is to think about, are we creating that level of trust across the organization to be able to raise your hand and to be able to say something. So with that story as my motivator, I'm going to ask the other panelists, like, how do you identify data in your organization that you didn't even necessarily know you were collecting that might have problems? How do you do, and that can happen everywhere, and your systems for understanding it haven't even recognized that exists. So how do we deal with that, panelists? Maybe Dominique, I'll ask you first.
Yeah, it's really just taking a look at your values as a company. And I just want to amplify what Agnes said and what you said, Doug, and what Michelle was talking about earlier. The reality is that every company has the no-nos, the things that you just ways that you do and don't do things. And just because we're dealing with technology, digital transformation, our customers' data, our employees' data is directly wrapped up in our brand. So you mentioned trust, and that, and so did Agnes, and that is just really core. Trusty companies are 400% more successful. Not paying attention to privacy in terms of embedding it in your, say, new AI systems can be lethal. I think Paul opened it up with just like one mistake can really attract activists and other things for public companies and destabilize private companies. We know some that are in bankruptcy, 23andMe and so forth, seeking bankruptcy protection around these data issues. So it's really important for the CEO to be able to set the tone that you're going to be a trustworthy company when it comes to your customers and your employees' data. And I think everything kind of flows from there.
I
That
agree
totally
with
makes
that.
sense. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say I agree with that, and people know that I use the phrase. My daughter used to have this bib that said "spit happens." We know that things will happen. It's how do you mitigate them? How do you handle them? And what is the trust that is in your organization that if something happens, then okay, they're going to handle it. They're going to make me whole. They're going to make this better for me. And so that's the key. We know things are going to happen, but how do you handle them? How do you mitigate them? I used to be a bank regulator, and when I was talking with my banks and giving them their regulatory letter, the ones that mitigated the issues, they got a little bit of icing on the cake. The ones that had consistent problems never paid attention to mitigating, to changing their practices, were the ones that got dinged.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let me ask Ian, because you show the great dashboard of all the things that are going on. How do you even identify the data that you have? If it's inferred data, it's not something that you normally track. It's just, it shows up in the cracks, but AI identifies that. How do you track that? How do you even know that it exists? And you're on mute. You're on mute.
First of all, I agree with trust is the core principle, and I would just add in measurement. You got to have, and you know, Agnes summed it up nicely with a system of record, but I just showed you it's technologically quite possible. You just have to make the effort to do it. And it is that simple. Like you've got more than one part of your system. But I guess just without getting into the weeds on that, it is just trust and measurement. None of these things are that hard to do. We've all got smart leaders that work for us, right? So it is just setting that singular goal and having a single source of truth and being able to measure what success looks like. And I would just leave it at that. Um, and I do think, again, like there is no reason you can't be tracking all this stuff. You just need to take some time and invest in it.
Well, thank you. Once you're tracking it, then I think we go right to mitigating it. And
I can tell you, well, it gets into the weeds a little bit, but I'll stay out of it as best I can. Like I've gone into companies and other people can comment on this, and within a month say that like 50 to 60% of that stuff does nothing. It did the first pass. If you triage this and start with what is just terrible. Where am I sharing medical data with ad tracker? And you just start with the worst case and the worst risk. You can make it, I mean, just an enormous amount of progress in weeks. Enormous. And it's so satisfying when you do it. And when people get there and just have control and measurement on top of it, it's a different ballgame. Now they still have to figure out all the other elements we're talking about, the data they're storing, how they're using it, the AI models they're training that could easily tarnish your reputation with one stupid response. But I hope that answers your question. And
yeah,
it sounds overwhelming, but it's really, really not. It's really not.
Let me add one more layer to this. So this is, you know, again, going back to I'm a kind of an old-fashioned girl. I keep going back to the old things that actually work. So once you've organized yourself around what are your assets, where are their assets, what are your business processes, you should be identifying data stewards in your business. They'll know a little bit about privacy and IP, but they'll know how to look with their business lens on what matters. So once you've got your inventory, if you've got a bucket of information, you can actually collaborate with that person who's your eyes and ears in that business unit, looking for what is essential. And that's how I really have uncovered these sort of things that some VP years ago collected, and nobody really knows it's there because that whole business unit is either defunct or we're just not doing that stuff. And those are the honeypots that every exploitation goes into the places where no one is looking. And that's, you know, as Ian says, it's super satisfying to get rid of the gunk and then have your advocates for data really cheering on what is good, what is quality, what is clean.
Barnacles.
Get those barnacles off and your ship will sail 5% faster.
well, let's turn it over to Andy. I think that's right, to talk about mitigation. I think we've set it up nicely for you, Andy.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And yeah, so many great comments. One thing I want to kind of tag on to is something Agnes said a while back. about the trailing nature of the regulatory environment from the technology. If you kind of zoom way out and you think about how we came into the internet age and started using data in all these amazing ways that was driving all kinds of new commercial ventures, new opportunities from revenue perspective, tons of positive impact to the economy in the ways that the commercial environment was growing. But what came with that was all of a sudden this sprawl of data, and then we start having issues where mistakes happen with data, cybersecurity. We start having these issues with data breaches, data leaks. And at first, when those things would happen, there wasn't a lot of regulatory pieces in place. We had some very early, like, okay, you need to notify people about this in certain timelines, but it really is about reputation, and that's why you keep hearing the panel talking about trust, transparency, being able to have policies and things in place to show that you care about this stuff and you handle data the right way. Then we've had this avalanche of regulations that I think Dominique mentioned earlier, the number of countries that have data-oriented regulations, plus all the different state laws. We track in my company just those that apply to notification around data incidents, and we're well over 200 at this point, different regulations worldwide. When you think about all the sectors that have specific laws, in addition to all these ones that are geographically scoped. So then kind of putting a pin on that and then thinking about now we've got AI in the mix here. And AI, we're seeing, an even faster adoption than the way that we, kind of came about this highly connected internet age. And so right now we have very rudimentary, like true specific AI laws in place, but they're coming, and they're kind of what we're gonna see is that the bad things that happen with AI, the worst case scenarios, at first they'll hit the news and become very big reputational issues. And the question will be, okay, why were you using the data this way? Why did you use that use case? And if you don't have a, really good story of how you've tracked that and said, okay, we chose to use AI this way because it was going to provide this level of benefit. If your answer is, hey, no idea, the AI just kind of came up with this on its own, or employee was kind of off in their own sort of shadow AI use case over here doing their own thing. That's not a great answer to the public. It's not a great answer to the regulators. That's when that magnifying glass comes down on you as a company. And it's really hard to manage through those kind of crisis situations. So that's what I kind of say on the bigger picture. And then I think just like generally thinking about mitigation today, I think for CEOs, a piece that is really surprising if you haven't lived in this space is to understand that these issues, security, privacy, AI, data use, when things go wrong, they become very big business problems. It's not just a security problem. It's not just a compliance problem. It has a blast radius that's really, really large. And so I'm going to share one slide that kind of exemplifies that, just to give you an idea. If you haven't been through a major data incident as a company, this will give you just some perspective and of what that can look like. So one second. So, anybody you talk to that has lived through, major, not even a major incident, just an incident of consequence, will describe incident response as chaos. It's just the common way people think about it. And that's because this is what it looks like. So, starting once an incident happens, you may find out about it through internal sources and external source, whatever that may be. You've got a security team, whether on their own or with the help of maybe an outsourced forensic firm, if it's an escalated situation, just trying to get their arms around the data that was involved. And that kind of ties back to the previous comments about having a data inventory, knowing how the company is using data. Like if that's really buttoned up, this first part of that equation becomes a lot easier to quickly get your arms around. Okay, what's the blast radius of what's happened? But often case people don't know, or there's these other ways that data gets out there that you're unaware of. So this becomes an evolving situation where some things on day one, more on day 10, day 20. But as they learn this information, it's shared with the legal team. They're then looking at this massive manual review of these 200 plus global regulations that could potentially be in scope, all their contractual obligations, because any contract today that involves the exchange of data involves requirements to notify each other. about what kind of incident maybe occurred. You have all these insurance obligations that matter. So all of this is, a massive, massive effort from legal team. There's often a pulling in of outside counsels. It gets escalated. Meanwhile, leadership needs to be kept up to date about what's happening. They need to be talking to the employees about it. The board cares about these issues now. You've got business units that need to be in touch with customers. And the reality is these parties here on the right in this box, their expectation is that this stuff, they're getting notified about this stuff in hours and that they're getting regular updates as things change. And they're also expecting that all of this back and forth, all of this coordination is happening with surgical precision and that you have a very solid track record, a system of record and audit trail to say, hey, we found out about this at this time. We took these actions. We acted responsibly. We followed our plans. We followed our policies. And there's an expectation, understanding that incidents are going to happen to everybody. Like stuff happens, the spit happens. I think is what Agnes said. Such a great quote. But the more you are prepared for it to say, we know this is going to happen, and we have a very strong way of dealing with it to make sure that we deal with it in a really timely fashion, that we're really doing best by our customers. That really empowers the trust, and you can really see it. And every organization goes through incidents, and those that do this well, are well prepared, have a really solid process they follow, they come out on the other side of it sometimes even stronger. Like you can even see some companies, like they go through a breach and they actually have a stronger reputation afterwards, believe it or not. And a lot of it is just preparing for this and understanding that's a reality. And again, back to what I said at the beginning, that this is a business problem. If this doesn't go well, this also starts to have these chain impacts where it just takes longer and longer to resolve. If you have all of these groups working on an incident for months and sometimes years, think about all the things they're not doing for the business that are really their full-time job. I've talked to one firm that had a major data breach. Their in-house counsel team couldn't even process new contracts for revenue because they were so caught up in all of this, and they couldn't take meetings for anything for most of a year outside of just dealing with all the regulatory mess. And so I'll pause there. I know I've been talking a while and let the panel chime in on some of these issues, but that's the mitigation problems you face kind of at the other end of the cycle with this.
May I just offer something for CEOs? Last October, I participated in the NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors, annual meeting, and the CEO of CrowdStrike was a speaker to the whole group, along with the chairman of the board. And we all know July 19th, 2024, that Friday morning, the CrowdStrike incident. This CEO was fantastic in his description of the work that the organization had been doing in prepared for a possible issue, what they did that day. And I think this might be a situation where the company falls into the better reputation afterwards. But one thing that the CEO, I think, made a mistake on, and he sort of admitted it on stage, and the chairman of the board actually brought it to his attention. That morning, the CEO immediately went on the Today Show and did not inform the board. The chair of the board didn't know. And so when she was interviewing him, she sort of kind of joked about that. But July to October, what's that, about 6 months? It still was resonating, the fact that there was a surprise to the chair of the board as well as to the board. So just want to caution, yes, handle these situations well, but no surprises for the board.
100%.
Andy, I was just looking, I loved I just couldn't think of a better way to present that. And I think about like the Equifax breach, where I think their stock went down 40%, right? And in terms of lack of preparation, it was surprise after surprise after surprise, including saying, okay, you can now get your credit score for half off. And And people were doing things like entering, did my data get breached? And they'd enter Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. It's like, dear Mr. Duck, your data has been breached. So it was, and I'm not trying to pile on It's hard when these things happen, but it was a lesson in like almost everything that can go wrong and what not to do. And I think, just I was in the industry at the time working for Experian. It just was infuriating watching. I'm sure the regulators felt even more so, just seeing the lack of preparedness, and I'd say the carelessness, at least how they interpreted it. So anyway, I just love the way you put that. And the business disruption is just phenomenal. And the blast radius even includes other people in your industry.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'd like to get to the sixth step here, but before we, and I would like to get to engaging you in the audience to whatever issues or questions you might have. So if you do have more, put them in the chat. And then we are going to be breaking at 9:30 Pacific time into smaller breakout groups where we can actually talk about our individual questions and issues and with our individual businesses. But Dominique, take us to step 6 to tell us about the importance of an auditable record.
Yeah, I think really Agnes and Ian and Andy's great slide just lays out why it's so important to be proactive rather than reactive, especially in the age of AI. So things are moving fast. And as I loved Agnes's word, like stuff's going to happen. And you want to be in a position to be able to answer the questions that might come up, especially with AI and privacy. Things related to, I kind of use our firm uses the trust framework, and this is how we operationalize this for AI. On the triage side, you're going to want to make sure that you're taking into account, are we using AI for our most sensitive information, our employee information, our customer personal information, and then is that high risk, low risk, medium risk for us as a company, and also benchmarking that against your legal obligations. So that's the T in trust for triage. In terms of training data, because this comes up a lot, you guys are probably looking at use cases in your companies or helping the companies you serve look at use cases, and the R in trust, I think about the right data. Do you have the correct data to train the model? And almost equally important, do you have the rights? So not just that it's right and correct data, but that do you have rights? Do you have privacy rights? Do you have business rights to train with the data that you are using? And I'm speaking to this audience because I got a sense of who's here. I don't think any of you are creating your own foundation models. You're building probably applications sitting on top of them. So really making sure, not trying to micromanage what Google or Microsoft or anybody else is doing on their clouds that are powered by large language models, but rather looking at your application and just ensuring that you have the right data. Output is really key, and this is where the U in trust comes in, the uninterrupted testing, monitoring, and auditing of your AI output. And somebody asked earlier, like, how do you figure, I guess, Doug, you were talking about, like, how do you figure out, like, what's accurate, what's ethical in your company? Here, there's probably people in your organization have a very good idea, as Michelle mentioned, like where your personal information assets are the most critical for your customers or your business. And so you're going to want to be able to test your output against that. Also your IP, your trade secrets, things that are confidential to the organization. We had situations where companies had employees typing in to find their fellow employees' actual salaries when that was confidential in a company, or using those tools with enterprise tools that had not been configured correctly to be able to find out, okay, who's had a sexual harassment claim, et cetera, in the company. So these are the types of things that you can avoid by thinking intentionally about what personal information are we going to be giving potentially access to in our applications, and what do we want to filter for and be alerted to. And then that's the S in trust, which is supervising humans. When you are alerted by one of these dashboards, whether it's Ian's or Andy's or anybody else's, that your AI is departing from the norms, what you have set as an intention for cookies on your website if the AI is going in a different direction, or what you've set, the intention you've set for cybersecurity, then supervising humans do need to step into the equation and use technical documentation, the last T in trust, logging data and metadata to correct the model. So I guess I'm just mindful of the privacy issues that have come up. One of our major retail pharmacies, Rite Aid, their vendors' AI was misidentifying paying customers as criminals. Privacy claims and other things being brought against them for that. Looking at a number of other companies, healthcare, financial, that have been accused of using personal information without permission. And we have regulators focused on that as well. United Healthcare, for example, in multiple shareholder has attracted an activist to begin with, ICRR, as well as multiple shareholder derivative actions and class actions based on personal information and the use of algorithms in healthcare decisions. So, not to scare everyone, but that the impetus for proactive looking at this now versus looking at it later is the loss of revenue, operations, and strategy. But I mean, Agnes, you sit on multiple boards, and ultimately looking at Caremark, and even for our CEOs with the McDonald's and fiduciary duty extending to them, what do you want to know as a board member? What do you want bubbled up to you? Because there's a lot of minutia that could be brought, but like, what do you care about in terms of, when I say audit, benchmarking against, so that you can exercise your duty of oversight?
That's exactly what I want. I want information that's going to allow me to provide that oversight responsibility as a director that I have. And what that means is I want to know about what keeps a management awake at 3 a.m. I remember being asked that myself as a banker. You know, what are your Bank of America 3 a.m. thoughts, Agnes? What are the challenges that are facing the organization when there is a data breach like a CrowdStrike? The question I have for the risk officers of the 3 boards I'm on, or for anyone, what is the impact to our organization with that? So those sorts of immediate responses percolating to the board. Yes, we can't know everything. We shouldn't know everything, but the issues that face the board, the issues that face the company that have to do with its management, its fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders, those are the types of facts that should come to us in a concise way, in a transparent way, on an ongoing basis. The morning of that July 19th event, we all received from all of my boards early that morning messages, secure messages about the situation and how the different companies were working on that. Same thing, for instance, when October 2024, a large financial institution had a $3 billion consent order on AML. Well, immediately receiving information about what the impact might be on organizations because of that. So I think management needs to always think about what the board itself might be asked individually. And sometimes, believe it or not, we do get questions because we're out and about. You know, what's happening with this? What's happening with that? Not that we should always respond, but again, it's rising to the top, those matters that are salient to the organization as it relates to their regulatory effort, their customer care, and their duty of care.
And this is so helpful, Agnes, from the board perspective. And I'm thinking about Michelle, who does need to report to a number of board members and CEOs. And I guess if you have to think about reporting to a CEO like Doug about something going on, what would you want to tell Doug? And then Doug, I'm going to put you on the spot and see what would you want to hear.
Yeah, so this is always an issue, and it's so helpful ahead of time to talk to board members that you have access to and say what's helpful. And one of my most impactful conversation years ago was with John Chambers, who's sort of legendary for his governance and risk taking. And he said, you know, it's good to know about the black swans, you know, what's going on in the market. That's a quick 1-minute review. And if you want more information, we can talk about that later. What I really want to know is are there processes in place that I need to drive? Is there progress over time? What are the trends here? So if we're doing privacy impact assessments, when those became new, how penetrated across the organization are they? How consistent are they? Do we have enough resources? What are the levers that I can push at this level to have my duty of care and loyalty served so that I really have enough information, as Agnes says, to understand what the problem is, but also some tools at my disposal to start to measure progress so that I can demonstrate and take action.
And Michelle, just on the point about resources, that's usually a question that comes up in camera for, say, a chief legal officer or a chief auditor or a chief compliance officer, really always asking them, do they have the resources to do their job?
Yeah, and knowing which ones to put on. Like a large organization is typically about 70% instrumentation and process, 30% people. It's exactly the reverse for startup boards that I sit on, where it's really 70% capability, 30% instrumentation.
So first of all, I'd like to thank the panel. I mean, this is a complex topic and we could talk all week on it, but this is a roundtable. So it's time to start you know, engaging with each other. So what questions might you have? There's a number of folks that are already posting in the chat. Jack Marshall, what might you want to know about or put on the table?
Well, you know, it's interesting for me because I'm a founder of a company that looks at SMS messages for fraud, right? And the more of them I can see, the better off all my stuff gets. But I have a hard time getting because people don't want to share that information, and I can't really get that information without getting permission for it, right? I know I have a competitor over in Europe that takes everybody's address book and puts it in a big database and uses that to kind of determine whether a message is real or not or from a friend. And it just seems like a huge privacy issue. So I'm just trying to really stay abreast of all the legal requirements and then also all the marketing requirements because privacy is such a weird thing to me in that no one wants their information given out, but everybody gives it out anyway, and they don't even think twice about it sometimes. So it's just an interesting space, and I've enjoyed this conversation because I like to stay on top of it because it's such a big part of what I do. So I don't know if I have any questions. I'm just trying to learn.
Okay, Connie, you've been participating in chat. What's your perspective or questions for the panel?
So, I mean, this is our world. We're a cybersecurity, IT, data privacy advisory firm. We've been around for almost 2 decades, and we often get called. You know, we're the ones that help provide and keep our clients from getting into these situations. But then inevitably, we'll get a client that has a breach, and you know, one of our clients right now, we're working through. We were there when the breach. We were literally walking their hallways when the breach happened. We were talking to the CISO. And I'll never forget the look on that guy's face when he saw his phone. We were having lunch, and that was 5 years ago. And we're still dealing with it. We're still dealing with the investigations, with the regulators. We're helping them with the documentation. We're designing the processes for them. We're putting in the controls. We're helping them configure the architectural, you know, frame, and looking at the constant monitoring. It's whack-a-mole, you know, as that other gentleman showed, that ecosystem is so dynamic and it's constantly moving. But I think someone else just talked about, you know, it's the business risk. We're constantly asking, guys, what's the impact to the business? How does this matter? Why does this matter? Is this going to sink the ship? If it's not, let's park it. Let's move forward. Let's keep, you know, and you have to. This is just a continuous, I think someone said agile and nimble. It really is. The best defense is a strong offense. So number one, start. have your process, do your inventory, do your scoping, do your monitoring, do your assessment, and then have your advisors, your team of advisors in to constantly reassess and have that fresh perspective, but have your processes and systems in place and the people. And then when and if it inevitably happens, your best defense then is just, look, we did everything we could and the inevitable happened. And the more transparent and the more partnership you kind of, I say that word lightly because I know there's a lot of lawyers on the call, but you want to partner with the regulators. You want to be as transparent as possible, give them a sufficient amount and timely information. And then from there, it's, look, guys, we did our best, and demonstrate and continue to demonstrate and follow through and be proactive in that documentation. Don't wait for them to follow up with you, but say, hey, here you go. By the way, this is all of our information and this is what we're doing. And here's our follow-up. So having, again, those partners to keep that mitigation and ongoing communication is absolutely critical in building up the trust. Because when the auditors have to follow up or they find discrepancies in what you say you did and you didn't do it, then the trust cycle falls apart. So that's just my 2 cents.
Okay,
All right,
Paul, do you mind if I comment real quick on that?
sure.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to also what Jack was saying about everybody says they care about privacy, but they give their data away. And I just want to call out that this is a couple things. There isn't real choice. There's this illusion of choice if you're an end user, but you don't have real choice. You can't live in the modern world and get to every site and read every policy. You're not going to do it. And that's really where the rub is happening. So for us as CEOs, regardless of the 100+ regulations, what a lot of what you've heard today, I think there are just some basic first principles that if you follow them, while you might not be bulletproof, you're going to be in way, way better shape. And so, but I'll just end with saying, what's happening now with both regulations, lawsuits, and everything else is there's an acknowledgement that there isn't real choice from the end user's perspective. So the burden is falling on the companies, and there's a complete lack of guidance. There's a lot of rules, but there's a complete lack of guidance. So anyway, I'm not sure that that's a piece of advice, but an acknowledgement of where I think things are going.
Who else?
Well, I noticed Debu had a really good question.
David, you there?
Yep, I'm there. So
This
I've
is
been
your
listening
space.
to all this conversation very intently, and essentially, the thing is, I built a company around solving exactly that same problem. So, given that I built the AI for ServiceNow, when I started the company, the biggest challenge is to understand what these assets are in your organization, which you need to govern. If you don't know what these assets are and how they are linked with each other, you're not going to have a proper governance stuff. And that compounds when our legal and compliance folks in an organization cannot tell the folks in the organization, whether it's people who are procuring a software or people who are building a software, what the organization's governance policies are based on the regulations, the guidance of policies which they have. Because different companies are different, right? If like a healthcare company will have a whole different set of regulations and guidance policies they need to care about compared to, say, a consulting company versus this. And without that visibility, you cannot get trust. And then if you don't, you're going to get transparency. And if you don't get transparency, then there's no trust. And you got to do this quite over and over again. And the more you do it with embedded within your SDLC process, the better you're going to get at the process, having a sort of like a dashboard which gives you the full aspect of it. And that's what the thesis. We have actually built a product around it. Customers are using it. We actually are able to look at the different assets. For example, people talked about parking certain classes of problems and not mitigating them. That's actually very true. Like, for example, a chatbot. You're building a chatbot. A chatbot probably uses a same 5 to 6 different models: an entity model, intent model, a language understanding model, a sentiment model. But a customer chatbot is very different from an employee chatbot. So a customer chatbot brings in different set of benefits, uses a different set of data sets or feature stores. An employee chatbot uses a different set of stuff. But the benefits they bring in to the organization, the risks are also different from the risks they bring in. And so it's very important to understand how an application service, which is actually the one which is being consumed, has been built out within an organization or has been procured, and how the procured software uses it. Without that visibility, it's almost impossible to have a proper governance in place. And governance should not be done. One more last thing. Governance should not be done without what you need to be compliant to, because there's no point doing governance in isolation. If you're for an organization with a business OpEx expense and everything else, you'd rather be compliant, figure out what you're going to be compliant to, and then run the governance first on that, and then do even better than that. That's that's been our philosophy.
Lawrence Knapp, I know you think about this very deeply. What are your thoughts, Lawrence? And you're on mute here.
Yeah, it's great to meet everyone. I run a company, ETF, that we're creating AI judges, a platform of judges for the training, the monitoring, and the post-incident correction around AI. We work with three of the biggest names in the foundation and frontier model space right now. And it's a wild, wild space. Expectations around, I'll be honest, privacy is a dirty word, right? And everyone's just living in the gray, if I could be so candid. And I think that there's actually a lot more data, even though models are forming things based upon billions of inputs, and they're doing trend analysis to get outputs. So they kind of live in this gray legal zone. But I'll tell you, I think there's a big opportunity to build trust. I mean, the fact that we accept hallucinations is almost scary. It shows that the utility is so high, but at the same time, we have to be real. And I think it's actually prevented AI from proliferating even faster than it already has. As someone was saying, I don't know who it was, I think Ian, you were saying that it's proliferated faster than the internet. I think that's right, but I think it would even be 10x more if there was true trust. And trust is a crazy word. I mean, it's not just privacy, right? It's also, goes to like there's a framework I know that Anthropic uses around, is it harmless? I mean, okay, so it's private, but did it harm me or tell me to harm myself? I mean, there's a lot of what I call human first or human-centered considerations in trust. And I'm currently been working on a paper called Trustworthy AI, which is kind of a parallel to trustworthy computing that Bill Gates wrote a seminal paper on back in 2002. And I think, Paul, you and I have had some great discussions about this, but we are at the very beginning of figuring out how to trust our future and trust it in a way where, it will impact at least like my kids and my grandkids someday, right? I mean, it is a really big deal when AI starts overriding its own kill switches. And that's happening when it is making whistleblower claims to the authorities or to the media without any input knowledge or even understanding that it happened from a human, just because you turned on something on your laptop and it misinterpreted an email that you wrote about someone. So these things are real. And so we're trying to figure out how to, create judges to train better and monitor and prevent and give trust. It really does parallel cyber and Y2K kind of together, because I think it is an existential threat, and that pressure like Y2K felt back in the 90s for those that were working at the time. I mean, it is like existential, and there is a time bomb here combined with this whole cyber fear, uncertainty, and doubt that is real. I mean, there's tangible harm has been done. So that's my 2 cents. A lot to learn.
Thank you. Eric, I know you have a few thoughts on this.
Just a couple. Yeah, again, I've been in this space for not a long time. A lot of my background's more on the healthcare, pharma, and medical device side, but last company I exited about a year ago was deeply into this data side. And again, as what I'm seeing, again, you guys mentioned a couple of times the UHG breach, and there's typically a breach every day nowadays within the healthcare side of things. And I think the need for a lot of the tools that AI can bring and a lot of the tools that a lot of these cybersecurity groups can bring is very, very beneficial. What I'm also, though, finding is the other side of it, where a lot of people are still very skeptical on what is happening with the data, how is it being used, where is the data going, in country, out country. There's that side of it as well. So I think it's a moving target in my world on healthcare. And I'm sure you guys are seeing it pretty much across the landscape. But yeah, it's just got to keep on top of it is probably the best takeaway.
All right. Sandor?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thank you for this fabulous conversation. I had a question particularly for Eric. I work in the healthcare business also with a lot of pharmaceutical companies. And the regulatory landscape in Europe and in the US and in Asia are quite distinct. And this conversation has been very US centric to my ear. I was wondering, as a healthcare person, if you had any thoughts about dealing with the sort of global issues, distinct regulatory regimes in different places, and how to
Yeah,
think
I
about
mean,
that.
what I'm finding is that really more the constriction of data in country. So over in Europe, there's a big focus on ensuring that if you're going to be using data, let's say in Austria or France, et cetera, that you keep your data in that country. There's ways to kind of get around that. You can look to de-identify that data. You can look at setting up some type of I call it a patchwork trailer system, where literally you can take the data, put it into a trailer mechanism, see that data within that trailer, but basically it doesn't really, quote unquote, fall outside of the country. So there's that aspect of it. So it's definitely, again, kind of the Wild West type of scenario still out there. There's regulations being put into play, but a lot of it is still kind of nuanced between a lot of the politics and a lot of the kind of go-to strategies within like Google and Meta and all of that. So I think it's going to be just an ongoing battle, to be frank. But again, you just got to keep on top of it.
Okay.
I'll just also add that the 6 steps on the privacy and cyber actually came out of the French Data Protection Authority's analysis of 6 steps to respond to GDPR, and then a roll-up in comparison of 167 FTC enforcement actions and state AGs, and then consumer class actions in the US, but also the trends in the 160 countries. It's the same thing with the trust framework for AI. That's a roll-up of about 100 countries, 6 continents with regulatory frameworks. So to Deepu's point, the only way to make this actionable to your technologists that are working with folks like Larry and others internally on your teams, your data scientists and technologists on your teams, is to have a clear framework. So, at our company, we saw all of these regs, but we were looking at it as, all right, there's a house of cards. What are the 5 things or 6 things that could take the whole house down? I knew one of them alone. And that's what we focus on in surfacing in the clear framework. And yes, there's plenty of other legal requirements. The EU AI Act is 375 pages, GDPR, hundreds of pages. We're not talking about all that, but the 6 things are the roll-up of those. So I just wanted to emphasize that I hear you loud and clear. That's why we made it a global approach.
Yeah, I want to put a fine point on that point, which is the core of this stuff is absolutely consistent across all nations. The accent is different. So if I'm in Asia, I'm thinking much more about transparency, my technical portfolio. If I'm in Europe, I'm talking much more about my administrative and my organizational controls. And in the US, I like to sit in the center of that, really in the legal risk, because we are so litigious here, but also with my privacy engineering, where I'm talking about, here's the call we made on how we're doing something in the UX. Here's the call we've made on securing network layer. Here's the call we've made, and making those calls and then allowing them to shift so that you don't hit the number one thing that you do. 75% of fines are paid if you're not doing what you're saying. And so having the ability to have your policy reflect your inner soul at your company, even as that soul is now exploding onto endpoint processing in a model-centric kind of way, you can at least have that story to tell. So when you call up Andy and say, Andy, I've had a breach, or you're figuring out what to scrape off the outside of your risk on your web properties with Locker, Now you've got at least a consistent story to tell, and you're anchoring yourself onto those 6 steps. That's going to keep you in pretty good shape around the world. You may not get everything off, but you'll have a cold, not cancer.
Yeah. So Paul, if I may just step in one more thing. Yeah. So what was just described is exactly how regulations can be. What we call in our product called factors. If you know about a FICO score, which typically tells about your credit worthiness, it'll say, okay, how much of your loans are outstanding, what this. Regulations, AI regulations can actually be broken down into very nicely, 10 different factors like fairness, bias, security, robustness, transparency. And most regulations will have something or other in this area. So it's a very nice way of ensuring that different areas are covered. And if you can score yourself on these groups of clusters or topics, which however you want to classify it, you can actually get a great handle on how your company is doing with respect to the various AI regulatory expectations which a country may have or industry may have on the products or services you deliver.
Hey, Debu, let's connect off. I worked in credit scoring and have applied it similarly to a slightly different area than you.
Sure, absolutely.
100%, because it breaks it down into categories, and you can start to build frameworks and actions around those categories that are succinct. So I think it's spot on. Obviously, I think it's spot on, but yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm going to decide this topic is a very sensitive, very critical, and very complex one. And as we put together these roundtables, each time we want to talk about very impactful things. The topic is actually so sensitive, I think it is difficult to talk about our own particular questions or issues unless we're in one of our very private, carefully curated groups. So we're not going to go into the interactive breakout groups. We're going to end in a few minutes here. But just a couple folks that I think may have some input, but want to get to. Chris Beal, you generate lots of data on your platform every day. Any observations or anything for the group today?
Oh, one observation is I'm simply thrilled that we expose almost nothing on our website. That's my big observation. It's like we're primitive with regard to how we interact with our customers. So our users are hand administered into our system. All the data goes into a secure data warehouse, or I pay attention to it personally. That's the other part, is that I think as I hear about, we're a relatively small organization. We're bootstrapped. I spend an hour and a half to 2 hours a day with my data and AI guy, with my hands on what we're doing with both data and AI. So I'm not relying on other people to tell me what's up. And I think that's just, I know it's a big investment, but I tell you what, there's magic in that data too. And having somebody else in the organization say, I found a pattern in the data, is nice. Having me sit with Tom Jung, as we do it from 11:30 to approximately 1:30, 2 o'clock every day, and for me to say, wait a minute, Tom, what do you think that is? And then we go in, that's just gold. So those are kind of two things. I'm lucky, no website of interest, nothing's there, I don't think. God knows there might be, but and the other thing is, we have a lot of data. I mean, we generate data from 230,000 B2B dials every day that are navigated. We have very careful contracts in place that tell us we have derivative works rights to that data, and we anonymize it before we use it for anything. But simplicity and putting your eyes on it directly and your fingers on it directly, I think, are kind of good things, but I think it's kind of hard to afford too. I'm just lucky.
Yep. All right. And Jeffrey C., we just met recently, but you've had some great comments in chat. Any observations or thoughts for us?
Yeah, so I was kind of just zooming in a bit on the trust element here. So the context is that we are rolling up 5 companies, about $400 million in ARR. We have a huge retail team that traditionally doesn't really use data very effectively to drive a lot of decisions. So what we've been doing is using LLMs essentially to bring the data to the frontline teams and guide them on anywhere from building purchasing plans, doing customer segmentations, running their promos, and so on. And I think just my observation in terms of the
You just muted yourself.
Sorry. Often we find that we're it kind of like the challenge with a lot of the users using LLMs on the trust part is that I think in the first phase when we're building it out, there was a lot of hallucinations around data. I realized that actually a lot of those can be solved if people build the backend properly. So basically, it's like you get LLMs to write SQL queries rather than trying to kind of analyze the raw data and the data schema. But then that's kind of one of the things that cause me to lose trust very quickly, right? They say, hey, look, I asked for what's my revenue in the last period, and you gave me some different numbers and stuff. The part that I think is quite interesting is that a lot of times the people, what they think is a hallucination is actually a difference in the logic in which the LLM is trying to solve a problem. So for example, it's a simple question of like, why did my net sales drop between 2023 and 2024? Could have all kinds of different analysis and you find very, very different answers. And often people will be like, oh, it's hallucinating, when what they really mean is that it looked at different parts of the data and it came to a different conclusion for what it thinks is happening. And that's where we actually get very, very interesting insight because, our CFO would come back and be like, oh, I thought it was because of churn, but the LLM thinks that it's because the basket of products people are buying has changed. And then that sparks like some really interesting conversations there. And the last part is very often it's just that because we have to restrict the data access by location and by the level of employee. So very often they will ask for an analysis and the data is not pulling from a backend. So they'll be like, oh, it's not able to do this because, and every time we tell them is that, oh, it's just the fact that we don't have that data piped in for you. And that's kind of there's a lot of like UX issues, I think, that drive the trust element. And I think something that we're trying to still figure out over time as we implement this.
Yep. All right. Well, we are a little over the 9:30 time Pacific time. And I would very much love to thank our panelists. Dominique, thank you. And Ian, thank you for helping us put together this amazing panel. And thank you all, Dominique, Ian, Doug, Andy, Michelle, Agnes, for being on the panel today and sharing your wisdom. This is a topic that is going to continue to challenge us and learn from, but collectively we need to. This is one of those things where coming together every so often to share what we know, what we've learned, what we're doing to manage around it, and actually potentially build a strategic advantage by doing it better than anybody else and building more trust. So with that, frankly, if we weren't able to bring leaders together in a trusted environment where we can share with each other, we wouldn't exist. So thank you for sharing and your trust, and thank you all for just educating me. So thanks for tuning in, and you will get a recording because frankly, I can't remember everything we talked about today, but it's going to be a valuable resource. So thanks all, and feel free if you have any questions or need any connections to anybody who was here today, just let us know. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Great day.
Stay safe.
This is a great conversation. Thank you.